Welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the Maintenance Asset Health Index. My name is not René Nazario. He's there, and he was feeling a little bit under the weather, so I step in. My name is Angel Torres, or Angel. Been with Visual K since forever. So let's talk a little bit about the Maintenance Asset Health Index. And one of the things that I'll do is walk you through the logic why we call it the Maintenance Asset Health Index. Suffice to know, we were granted a patent, I think it was last year, just for the sake of it, for the fun of it. So we're more than willing to share this knowledge with everyone. Now, here's the challenge, right? If you think about the assets that you currently have under your responsibility, some of them might be hooked up to some sensor, control system, PLCs, whatever. So you're able to read, and it's funny because sometimes, and I heard this yesterday, somebody that had these sensors that were looking at basically the production side of the asset, not necessarily the performance of the asset. And now they're like, oh, yeah, that data is there too, so they're bringing it in. So when it comes to asset health, you can look at it, and this is the way we see it. So Paul, keep me honest here. There you are, cool. You can think of it in terms of how healthy the asset is, or what is the level of risk that the asset might be operating at, right? So these are two ways of looking at it. So like I said, right, you have all these devices that are somehow connected to something that you can actually read, but then in our facilities, for the most part, that tends to be a minority of the assets, even though it's becoming cheaper and more of them are getting connected. So when we started doing this work, we've done a lot of power plants, and obviously their turbines, their main pieces of equipment are even remotely operated and controlled. But then they have a million different assets that don't necessarily have that type of capabilities. So we said, okay, so what do we have out there that we can use to somehow calculate the health of that asset, right? And we said, okay, so we have, we're EAM people, so we have a whole bunch of EAM transactional data. Let's see how we can use that, right? So obviously we had work orders, we had overhauls, we had criticality, we had condition assessments. Certainly we had a history in terms of, what was the split between PMs and correctives, right? And then what's an inventory? Some of our customers, they use their inventory, or they keep their inventory inside of EAM. Others, they have an ERP, and typically we hook those up so that we have visibility. So those are the basics, right? Everybody in this room that uses EAM has 90% of that, maybe 100% of that. So that's what we have at hand. So how do we make the most out of it? For those of you not familiar with power generation, this is a power plant. And the magic of it is, in this case, we're talking a steam turbine. Basically, the Hersig here is what generates the steam. You have a steam turbine, you have a generator of some sort, and that will create electricity. Easy, right? And a transformer that will step up that voltage, pump it into the grid, and somehow it gets to your house. There's also controls. There's also what's called balance of plant, which means everything else, right? So for the most part, turbines, generators, some transformers out there, they have sensors, they send out their signals, they're controlled in some remote fashion. But then when it comes to things like balance of plant, there's like a million different things out there that are not necessarily controlled or monitored, right? So this is kind of the lay of the land when it comes to power generation, and this is where we got started, right? So we came up with this magnificent formula for calculating the asset health index, right? We're taking basically probability of, probability is a funny word. I basically flunked my statistics course when I was in college. So this is something that I can certainly relate to. How much time do we have before it breaks, right? And we try to simplify this. PM compliance. Are we keeping up with our frequencies, right? Are we actually generating those work orders? Are we actually executing and closing the work orders in the time they were supposed to? Sorry, can't see you. Also, the ratio between preventive and corrective work orders, that gives an indication. If you're doing your preventive right, you should have less breakdowns, right? So that gives you an idea in terms of, how successful or effective are you being with your PM program. Work order priority, again, priority is one of those loaded words. Depends on who's asking, right? If the general manager drawer doesn't open in his desk, that's high priority. If the entire manufacturing facility goes down, maybe not so much, right? What is the condition of the asset? We do look at condition, and we try, again, to simplify things. The people who are actually doing the work, that are touching, smelling, hearing these devices, these assets, they can look at them, right? And they can give you a good assessment in terms of their condition. You can do vibration, thermal, you can do a whole bunch of different things. But again, keep it simple. You're looking at it, give me a fair assessment. Yeah, I think this is new and it's going to last for a while, right? And then, do I have the spares that I need to keep this asset running? Obviously, that will introduce a level of uncertainty. If it goes down, what could have taken 2 hours for me to fix, now it's going to take 2 days because I have just to sit and wait till these spares get here, right? So that also introduces an element of uncertainty in terms of the total impact of that downtime. So far, so good? Still out there? Cool. That's why I'm not a rock star. All right, so now let's discuss each one of these elements. And what I want to do is to walk you through each one so you get an idea of what we're doing and how we're doing it. In terms of probability, you can get all, fancy, reliable, super metric here and look at, for example, the bathtub curve and kind of like say, yes, we are here. And there's a chance that, it may break down. But when it comes to things like power generation, one thing that happens is that, for example, a gas turbine, it gets overhauled every 3,000 hours, every 2 years, right? And basically what we said is, well, from the last overhaul to the next, well, as I get closer to the next one, the chances of this thing breaking down, they just increase, right? Easy. So we said, all right, so the last one was done in 2018. By the way, this is obviously outdated, but you get the idea, right? I'm 24 months into this overhaul cycle, so basically I have consumed 66% of my life, if I look at it that way, right? So if you're doing overhauls or these major shutdowns, this is one way to look at it. How much time has transpired from the last overhaul to the next, okay? Simple. Now, when we look at PM compliance, by the way, most of these metrics, instead of looking at the complete life of the asset, what we've done is that we have used the overhaul cycle as a shorter version and a horizon for everything that we're looking at. So we're looking at all the PMs that should have been generated and executed within that overhaul cycle. So rather than to look at the entire universe of work orders and PMs, we're just looking at the ones that correspond to this cycle, right? Then we look at what was the schedule end date and when did you actually did it. And if you did it within that, you get a hit, right? And I just look at the total number of hits versus the total number of work orders within my sample. And that gives me an idea in terms of PM compliance. EAM has a standard report that looks into PM compliance. Basically, it's the same concept here. Perhaps the standard report is a little bit unforgiving in the fact that it just looks at like, okay, so it was meant to be done on this date. We put a little buffer in there just to make it more realistic, I think. The next element is, like I said, right? Again, over this period of time, what is the ratio between my PMs and my correctives? Easy, right? And with that, and with that, I get an idea in terms of how am I doing, right? We have some customers that felt like they had to put some factors in there in their operation, in their maintenance regime. They like to think that the proportion is not necessarily linear, but more like, well, for every 6, then maybe I do a PM. So I wouldn't say that they cheated, but they gave themselves a little leeway into how we interpret this data. So again, it's really up to you how you want to implement something like this. So far, so good? Questions? All right, cool. Easy. The next one is work order priority. EAM has a built-in function for calculating the work order priority, in case you didn't know or were not using it. We came up with our own definition, right? So what we do is we take the asset criticality. By the way, show of hands, how many of you have your assets ranked by criticality? You don't count. Okay, all right, fair. By the way, are you familiar with APM, the new solution Hexagon has? The way we look, and I say we because we've been working with them for a while now, we look at let me put it back. Because we know that few people get to rank all of their assets by criticality, the approach that has been taken is to look at risk from the perspective of which assets are breaking down the most, and then out of those breaks, how much is it costing? So it gives you an indication as to which are the bad actors using the data that you currently have. So the point being that you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have all of your assets ranked by criticality, because we know it takes a while, right? You have to sit down with your HSE, your maintenance, your finance, come to some sort of understanding in terms of the criteria for what criticality means. So this is a good proxy for that. That's just an APM ad right here in the middle of it. Okay, so asset criticality, the next one being work order impact. And again, this is a way for us to give some weight to the different types of work orders that you may have in your day-to-day. And then the work order age. Again, we look at this in terms of that window that we specified, that overhaul window, and through it, we say, okay, so out of my urgent, and this is only a 4-tier system, so we're looking at urgent, priority 1s, and then obviously your 2s and 3s, and then we do a ratio out of the entire population or universe during that period. How many of your urgents and priority 1s did you close? And again, that gives you an indication of, are you taking the best care possible of the most urgent and most critical work orders. Now, since you haven't asked, I'm going to explain a little bit more of this. This is a very simple concept, which we think it's very powerful. And then the other one being the age of the work order. So the way we did it, this is just a criticality scale on our assets. Again, we can probably substitute for risk, but this is one way to go. And then, again, we ranked the work orders and assign a work order impact, which is kind of like linked to the work order class or the work order type. That way, we take away the human factor out of the equation and let the system do the calculation for me. Obviously, you can override it. And then, obviously, the last one being the age factor. Basically, what we're doing is that we're aging work orders in 2-week increments. And with that, we allow for the work order as it ages to, if the asset is critical and the work order type is critical, as it ages, then the priority of the work order will increase. We review it like week after week, right? Basically, you multiply the three and you get something like this. We define the different regions, and with that, we say this is urgent 1, 2, and 3, right? And then over time, as the work order ages, then the priority of the work order kind of will take care of itself, right? And will increase over time. So that's the mechanism that we devise for keeping up with the priority, and then put together a process in place that will automatically update the priority over time, okay? Now, last one, like I said, is the asset condition, right? And one thing that we introduced as one of the activities on the work order was a condition evaluation. So the tech or the mechanic will have its very own tasks there, and then there's a secondary task that will say, just give me an idea of, how is it? Is it like new, super bad, or FUBR, right? Perhaps the only other thing is that for systems such as this one, what we're doing is that we're really ranking at the unit level, but then we're looking through the hierarchy across all of its children. And then basically, if we have a critical critical child, which is in poor condition, then the main system will basically take that condition for the whole unit, right? One of our customers, they kept seeing that one of their turbines was like in poor condition, and what they figured out was that there was a scaffold sitting right next to it, which was critical because it was a safety device that was in poor condition, right? So they decided to make a change to the hierarchy to take out that scaffold so that it would not impact the actual asset, which was the turbine. Again, these are the kind of things that, as you start looking at these and implementing these kind of things, will make you think in terms of how do I have my hierarchy set up, what's really critical in my equipment master. So again, a very simple way, but it tends to reflect on how you're putting your things together, your configuration together, your data together. Okay? Blah, 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 and more blah, blah, blah. Fine. All right. This is the scale, again, that we developed for assessing the condition of the asset. Again, this is no thermography, no vibration analysis. We're just looking at it, listening to it, tasting it. Pumps have a very colorful taste, I would say. So maybe you want to try that when you go back home. But again, the point being, keep it simple, right? You can certainly use the equipment ranking functionality within EAM to do these condition assessments. But what does condition mean? You can get, very, very complicated here, or you can go the easy route, or somewhere in between, right? And then finally, looking at the critical spares, right? So again, I have an asset, and I have my critical spares attached to that asset, and what we're doing is that we're just looking into whether I have it in stock and whether I have enough of it, given that maybe this asset, when I do a PM or I do a corrective, it needs 2 of those, right? So do I have 2, or do I have just 1? And with that, we measure whether it's a hit, I am complying with my critical parts, I have them, and I have enough in stock, or not. Yes, sir? Oh my God, do you have time? No. Okay, so depending on who you ask, right, somebody will have a different definition of what's a critical spare. Typically, what we do is that we start off with the OEM recommendation out of your PMs, because, you have to start somewhere, right? Now we're bringing in some additional tools into the mix that will look at the part level. You can do ABC analysis within EAM, right? And that could be an indication of our criticality ranking. So that's one option. If you look at the history of where that part, I mean, how long have you been using EAM? So you have, a fairly decent history for you to go back, look through and say, okay, so this part we constantly use on this asset which happens to be critical, then chances are that the part is critical, right? And then the other has to do with procurement. Do you have a single source? Do you have multiple suppliers, right? That will certainly become increasingly more important if you have a single supplier. And then the other is the actual lead time. So if you're either doing procurement within EAM or perhaps on the ERP, you can calculate that. This part, in the probably after COVID, when did we place the PO, when it was actually received, and that will give you an indication for lead time, right? So then you can decide which of those factors has more weight, and with that, then you could rank your parts. You have several options. Right now, EAM doesn't have all of these, let's say, algorithms that will allow you to do that kind of analysis. We're bringing tools that will sit on top of EAM, consume all that data. And we have options, right? One is to replace the current ABC classification that it's only based on usage or cost, right? The standard EAM. Replace that by what we're calculating outside of EAM. Or you can just create something like a criticality flag at the part master and just turn it on and off. I mean, if I made it sound easy, it's not, right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, the problem with criticality for parts, just the same as with assets, it's that sometimes it depends on who yells, the loudest. But using this type of information, it gets you to a better place in terms of having a little something more objective. We had a conversation with the finance folks over at another customer, and we were talking about MRO optimization, and they were very excited. They, we can reduce our cost. And then they went to the maintenance people and said, hey, wait a second. You're not touching my parts, right? So when we explained the methodology for determining what a critical spare is, they were like, oh, okay, yeah, that sounds fair, right? Let's go down this way. So again, single supplier, lead time, history of where the part has been used, and with that, I think you have a fair assessment as to this might be a critical part. And then somebody may say, but you forgot. It was only made in the summer, so we need to get another one, right? So that, a human will still need to be involved. But that will take a lot of the guesswork out of the equation. Cool? All right. So with that, we take all the different scores for each one of these elements, and then we adjust by giving it a weight. Simple equation, multiply, add, and we get to a number. So a 91 can either say that the asset is in good health or that is low risk because you're doing a good job of keeping it, maintaining it, keeping the spares that you need to keep it running. Now, what we did is that we used InfoBurst to create a dashboard. And that works in the sense that you're able to drill down and say, okay, so here's my unit. These are the Hersey, the turbine, the generator, right? So you can go that level deep. And then if you see anything that's kind of like out of whack, then you can drill down further, go to the asset level and try to find out what's happening. That's how we saw the scaffolding on the turbine. However, we're looking forward, right? And the problem with dashboards is that sometimes they require a human to look at the dashboard, think about it, come to a decision, go to EAM, create a work order, and so on and so forth, right? So what we're thinking, and this is, again, this is just an idea so far, is to use APM to monitor, just the same way APM is able to take on signals for, temperature, vibration, whatever, and monitor that. For some static assets, we're thinking of bringing the asset health index into APM and let it trend that over time. You're not going to get signals every 2 seconds, but you may get signals every month or so. And with that, then you can see, here's a degradation pattern. Let me just take a look at that. And APM has the connectors back into EAM, which will allow you to automatically create a work order if you trust the data well enough to generate yet another work order for you to take a look at, right? So dashboards, they certainly help, but I think the next step for you guys that are overworked and overwhelmed is to let some of these additional tools kind of like drive the next phase, which would be, hey, you need to take a look at this, right? And send people out to the field to do it. So let me just walk you through what we're thinking. This is something that we're thinking for a distribution grid, the electrical grid, which is made out of poles, lines, transformers, things that don't move, things that have no intelligent devices attached to them, like a wooden pole, for example. So today, most utilities, they send people out to the field to do their inspections. It's a regular process. And then they bring back the defects that they found. So what we're doing is that we're taking that information, and with that, we're calculating the health index for each and every one of these different devices out in the field. And again, imagine trying to put a dashboard together for, 400,000 poles, and then drilling down through it until you get to the one that's a bad actor, and then you send people out to the field to replace it. It's really not actionable. So that's where APM will come into the fold, and this is something that Joe hasn't approved yet. But the intent is to change a little bit the way in which APM will look at something like this to do the trending for us and then trigger the actions back into EAM. So what I describe in terms of the power generation plant, I think it's easier in the sense that these are all rotating equipment. But what about if you have a large population of static equipment, like pipelines, poles, those kind of things? So it all hinges on inspections, right? So if you have a good inspection program in place, these are ways in which you can get more out of the inspection rather than to just do an inspection, identify a defect, send a crew out, send a technician out to take care of that defect. We think we can pull that data and turn it into something a little bit more useful. Okay, so with that, yeah, we're early. Any questions, comments? Yes, the person in the back by the name of Kevin. Okay, that's a good question. So for the straight condition, which is just somebody looking at the equipment, right? It's not really an inspection in that sense. Somebody basically judging. That's kind of like the easiest way. For things that actually have like inspections, with multiple points, and then things like nonconformities, and then we manage the nonconformities, we're looking specifically into the nonconformities at the asset level, regardless of how they came to be, whether it was a route or a single work order, whatever it was. But we just kind of look at the end result, which is I have all these defects. And then obviously we gauge and give weight to the different defects, because some of them might be minor, others could be very critical. And with that we say, here's the condition for the asset based on the observations. Good? Cool. Mm-hmm. The answer is no. That's why we're thinking of using APM. Because I don't think that it would be that helpful to do it in such a way that's disconnected from EAM. Because I don't want people being, oh, okay, here's a problem, let me create a work order. I think that will kind of defeat the purpose. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, let's take APM, right? So within APM, one of the main things that you'll do is define a strategy, right? And the strategy could be very well be, let's create a PM that's going to be done every 3 months, right? But with all the data that's available, you can also say, let's do condition-based maintenance, right? And APM will take that, and you have two options. One is to define the actual ranges. To me, that's, again, a little bit of a tall order, because if you have a huge population, then you have to go like one by one, right? But within APM, you also have a little bit of AI that you can train and say, this is what looks like, what good looks like, and then anything outside, just raise your hand, create a work order, send me a message, call me in, on my phone and let me know. So I think right now we have the technology available. We just need to start getting to it. And the other thing, and this is one thing that I'm kind of preaching, is that you don't have to have perfect data for you to go into APM. APM will give you enough feedback to let you adjust, right, over time. Because people tend to think of this whole process as a pyramid where you have to have everything perfect, everything in place before you can implement something like this. But the fact is that whatever it is that you have today, it's enough to get you started, right? Well, again, um, one of the things that we like about APM is that I can pull work order data back from EAM into it, and then I can, for example, for PM compliance, that's something standard that APM does. Now, if you throw on top of that performance data, then you would see that you hit the mark, but the performance of the asset was doing just fine. So what about if we extend it a little bit, right? So these tools are bringing all of that data together. I don't know when are we gonna get to a point where we'll let AI close a work order for you, right? We have customers that they want the supervisors to look at every work order, make sure that it has all these different elements before it can be closed. Some customers have put additional activities for the supervisor with a checklist to go and, yep, you did it, it's working, we're all good, right? We have customers that are using the service request, right? Goes through the flow, they close it, and then they send out the survey. And if somebody yells and says, no, you did not fix it, then they go back, right? So I think we have all these different elements that we have to play with in order for us to get to a point where, you know, people don't have to chase after work orders. Today, we use backlog reports, and that tells us in the flow where things are getting stuck, right? And we can go and find out why. But yeah, I think we're headed that way. Thank you. I don't know, Kevin. We have managers asking for them to approve, you know, like $5 PO, right? Yeah. Uh, yeah, alert management is certainly a good tool, right? But I think it lacks in the sense that it's too rigid. These are the conditions, and then do this. I think we're getting to a point where we have more options, be a little bit more flexible. I don't know. All fair points. Paul. Thank you. Ah, there you go. Mhm. The answer is we haven't done enough of this yet, and our customers haven't done enough of this yet to come back to saying, right? So to me, this is probably like version 1.0. We certainly need to experiment and adjust, right? But I think it's important that it becomes a feedback loop, right? We stay in the fold. Right now, we're conducting quarterly reliability reviews with one of our customers, and this is where these things are starting to come out, right? If I take on the topic of the day of us being leaders and coaches, that's, I think, where we add the most value, where we can just keep up with this and try to understand what's going on and then fine tune it. Perfect. Are we good? Are we having lunch? Let's do it. Thank you so much. There's one more thing, very important. In October 15 and 16 of this year, we're going to host the second annual Reliability and Maintenance Congress in Puerto Rico. October is the worst time of the year for you to fly from the US into a Caribbean country. Despite of that, what we've done with this Congress is that we have an EAM track, and then we have our reliability track. For example, George out there, he was there with us last October, right? And just like George, we bring in reliability practitioners, basically to help you understand, and then obviously there's the EAM side of the house as to how to put some of those things into action. So please make a note of it. Certainly we'll be sending out more information as we put the event together and put the agenda together and the presenters together, but just keep an eye out for this. So we would love to have you. Thank you.